What's up everybody, man, back. Welcome to a brand new video, and today we are going to be checking out the Godzilla -1 Banpresto Monster Roar Attack version, aka the Godzilla -1 version A Atomic Breath version. The Banpresto Shin Godzilla is a thing of legend. I can't remember, I think it was like you won it in a lottery, but it was one of the first Shin Godzilla figures we had ever seen. We talked so much about it on this channel back in the day. It was also the figure that, because they have these versions A, B, and C, we saw that they were labeled as like monsters A, B, C, and it actually tipped a lot of us off that Shin Godzilla was gonna have multiple forms in the movie, even though it wound up not being what the Banpresto figures were. I think there was a normal one, an Atomic Breath version, and then some other one, maybe a frozen version. Although very ironically, there were 3 forms of Godzilla that appeared in the movie. These Bandai Namco Banpresto figures have been popping up a lot lately in US stores, which is pretty freaking cool. I like seeing the variety in US stores, that's pretty awesome. These Banpresto ones are more like a middle market figure, kind of in between your higher to lower end figures. I actually did not get this in any of the US stores I've seen these things start to pop up in. I got this from Anime Matsuri, and boy do I wish I could tell you who sold it to me. It wasn't the Godzilla store, it was a vendor at the convention, and unfortunately the clip I have of the vendor, something happened to it where it first of all doesn't have audio, and second of all cuts off mid-clip, and it's like one of the only ones that I took from Matsuri 2024 that had any issues, so I don't know what was up with that. But if I ever find out who it was that sold me this, I'd love to shout them out because they were incredibly nice about it. They had a bunch of these things on display and it was a pretty cool booth. I would love to shout those guys out. But anyways, let's get into the review here. Here is the Banpresto Godzilla, I'm gonna call it Atomic Breath or Charged version, from Godzilla -1. The box art is really nice. I like it. I like the blue background. It's kind of like a blue Kirby dot-ish background. I like it. Godzilla's looking pretty sick on the front of that thing. Here's the side of the box where you can see Godzilla next to the logo. Pretty sick. On the opposite side of the box, they show the different versions of Godzilla there are. So there's a normal Godzilla, there's the charged version, which we got, and then there's the Godzilla minus color. This one's actually the minus color. And then here's the top of the box. All of these figures were on sale at Anime Matsuri, but after seeing them in person and weighing my options and knowing that I already have some Godzilla -1 figures, I decided to pull the trigger and get the Atomic Charged version, which is not normally the way I like to do it. I normally like to get the standard version of the character, and then if I already own it, then I'll get the Atomic version. But for this one, it was like, whatever. I've already got the Bandai one, I've got the SH one, and then now I also own the Super 7 one. So it's kind of like, why not get the Atomic version? It'll be fun. I started to see these things at Second and Charles lately, but I mostly see them for Godzilla Kong the New Empire. I don't think I've come across the -1 yet. Whoa, there's a lot more empty space in this box than you'd expect. They really did not need to use this big of a box for this figure when it turns out to be that small. Although I appreciate them securing it in there so it won't get hurt. And as much as I like this box, I just cannot keep saving these things. I have no room for them, so I'm sorry. But because this does feel like a sturdier figure, one that's not gonna break as easily, this box has gotta go. I'm sorry, I just can't keep saving them, man. The only accessory this figure, if we want to call it an accessory, comes with is this little piece right here. It's a base so you can set the tail in, because the way Godzilla's positioned, his tail actually sticks off the ground a little bit, and so if you set him up without it, he'll kind of tilt over and fall. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it if you don't have this. He just kind of sits where his feet are a little raised off the ground, but it is better with this, where it can actually hold it and support him and get him to stand the way you want. Now, generally, from what I'm seeing online, depending on where you order from, and this is not including shipping, this dude runs you from about $30 to $60. I bought it for $45, so not a bad price at all. And that's the dude. This figure is actually pretty well sculpted. I'm liking it a lot. There's a lot of depth and a lot of texture in it, pretty much everywhere except the face. Godzilla's face does look a little smooth to me. It looks a little soft vinylish to me. It does look a little bit like the normal Bandai's. I would have liked a little extra depth and texture in this thing, but maybe a better paint job could have brought that out a little more, because it does have a fairly decent sculpt on it. Getting into Godzilla's body, it actually looks really good. The chest is looking really crisp, a lot of great details in it, moving through the belly and into the lower region. It looks really solid. Godzilla's arms look great with the really pronounced shoulders. I really like that. Great plating moving down the arm into the very exaggerated elbow shards, which I'm loving. I think that looks fantastic. The front of the arm's looking really good, leading into the hands, which look fantastic. I love the poses the hands are in. It looks very strong and very scary, very monsterish. Moving into Godzilla's legs, there's a lot of great detailing in those as well, especially on the knees. I'm loving that. And then getting into those giant Godzilla -1 feet, which look fantastic. They've done a very, very good job with that. Godzilla's got a pretty decent amount of texture up until you get to the bottom of the tail. Underneath, Godzilla's got a lot of good texture. Bottom of the feet are a little smooth. Bottom of the tail is a little smooth as well. It's actually where they put the logo, and it doesn't matter too much because that part, the part that's smoothest, is where you put Godzilla on the tail base so that he can support himself. Because once you move away from that, the tail actually is pretty textured, which looks really good. The spines themselves are very well sculpted, capturing the design and aesthetic of -1 very closely. I'm liking that a lot. They've got great texturing and depth to them as well. These are translucent spines, so they capture light in a very interesting way. That looks awesome. I'm loving that. Onto the tail, the spines are a little muddy right here. You can see they kind of like crunch into one another and turn into a big brick of spines. I have no idea what's up with that. I guess just because of the way Godzilla's tail is bent, they couldn't figure out another way to sculpt these things. Looks a little ridiculous, but that's not going to be the part of the figure you're going to be looking at the most. The spines on the rest of the tail look pretty good, but they are a little muddy as well. And then they do travel through the top, which is pretty cool. I love the arc Godzilla's tail's in. That's a really cool position. Very solid posing for the figure. I really like the pose. The paint job itself is pretty decent. Godzilla's mouth is a turquoise blue along with his eyes. There are no pupils in the eyes. I wish there were, but overall it's pretty cool. Makes him look like he's glowing. Godzilla does have a decent amount of brown highlights throughout the body. You can especially see them on the legs, which is pretty cool, but they are on the chest as well, which I really appreciate, and they're all over the sides, which looks good. They're subtle though. The fingernails are painted great. The feet are painted really well, with the toenails being painted very strong. There's a really cool turquoise-ish shiny metallic look where Godzilla's spines have started to charge up on his neck here, and you can see it kind of carries over onto the sides of the spines, which is pretty neat. It's also the same way they've painted up the tail spines. The actual blue, glowing, translucent plastic they've used for the dorsal spines looks fantastic. That looks really cool. It does create a really harsh contrast between the final back spine and the first tail spine though, which I'm never the biggest fan of, but I see that happen a lot with these figures, so I'm kind of used to it, and I don't have the biggest issue with it because the color they've picked for the tail spines is carried through onto the back here, so it's not like it comes completely out of nowhere. As for articulation, I'm actually surprised to see there isn't any. I've never gotten a Banpresto Godzilla figure before, and I guess I knew that the Shin Godzilla one had no articulation, but I am surprised to see there's none here, especially because it looks like there would be. You can actually see some lines around Godzilla's thighs and on the legs where they've attached the plastic of the legs to the body, and that feels like a place where there would be articulation, as well as around the tail base, around the shoulders, and specifically around Godzilla's neck. I thought if anything, that at least was going to be a piece where you could turn Godzilla's head and have him look from side to side, but in fact that's not. There's no articulation to that. I guess if it's a consistent thing across the entire Banpresto Godzilla line, I really can't complain about it that much because it's just the way these figures come, but I do think it would have been a fairly easy thing to add those points of articulation and hold the sculpt and pose you've given Godzilla. For our figure comparisons, here is the Bandai Movie Monster Series Godzilla -1 standing off against the Godzilla -1 Banpresto. They're about the same size, and you can see they're very different in terms of approach. I really love the pose of the Banpresto, especially compared to the Movie Monster Series. He just looks very strong and menacing. The sculpt overall has a lot more richness, a lot more depth to it, although, interestingly, I actually do like the Movie Monster Series face more. I think the face of the Movie Monster Series one does have a little bit better of a sculpt, but overall, across the entire body, the Banpresto one does outshine it. The Banpresto one also generally has a better paint job than the Bandai Movie Monster Series figure, although it is more subtle. The Movie Monster Series is a little more cartoonish and exaggerated in its paint, both in the brights and the darks, whereas the Banpresto one looks a little more consistent overall with the movie, but it also makes it more subtle on the shelf. It's pretty interesting. You'll love to see it, man. You'll love to see it. He is kind of a bridge between the lower and the high-end figures. As you can see, here is the Super 7 Godzilla -1, which we've just reviewed on the channel. Go check that review out. And oh my god, the Super 7 one towers over this poor Banpresto one, makes him look tiny, and also outclasses him all over the place. Just a stronger sculpt, a more menacing figure, better paint, obviously. It's overall the higher quality. But I did want to show those guys off just so you could see where we're jumping from one to the next. Interestingly, the Banpresto one does actually pair a little better with the SH MonsterArts MonsterArts Godzilla -1, as you can see the two of them squaring off there. Much closer in size, with the MonsterArts just being a little taller. And the paint job is a lot more consistent between these two figures, as they're both using similar darks and similar lights, making it so that they do look fairly complementary to one another, and they actually look like the same Godzilla. It's pretty cool. I really like that. The jump from the MonsterArts to this one's spines being all translucent blue is also pretty sick. I'm a big fan of that. These two actually complement each other probably the best together out of all of them, interestingly enough. Well, I guess that's my first Banpresto Godzilla figure. I'm actually pretty happy with it overall. This is definitely a display figure, so if a kid gets it, I think they are going to be disappointed with the fact that there is no articulation. The pose is fixed. As a kid, that certainly would have driven me nuts if I was playing with this thing. And I do think because these are starting to pop up in like Second and Charles and US stores now, that is something to be cautious, especially as we're in the holiday season. But overall, I'm very happy with this figure. I think it looks awesome. It's got a great in-hand feel. It's kind of a mix between a softer plastic and a harder plastic, which is interesting. It feels more indestructible than something like your Super 7, but way more destructible than something like your Movie Monster series, which again kind of plays into the fact that this is a bridge between the middle to higher end figures. And I think the price from $35 is very worth it for a figure like this. I wouldn't be spending much more than that. I've seen these things running for like $60 to $80, or for some reason people are scalping the original release, the non-atomic version, for like over $100, which is absolutely not worth that. I'd say these figures are probably honestly worth about 25 bucks, but in today's market, I think 35 is a very solid price for this figure. Overall, I'm gonna give this guy a 7 out of 10 on a middle ground figure market scale, so comparing it to things like NECA. The sculpt is very good. It's got a lot of depth. The paint is pretty solid. I'm very happy with it, but the lack of articulation and the fact that I do think the face itself should look much better than it does, as well as the fact that you can see these creases where the plastics have been attached to each other but they don't do anything, does knock it down for me. 7 out of 10, also because of the way they've handled the dorsal spines right here is kind of sloppy. 7 out of 10, I do think it's worth it if you're a big -1 fan like myself, but if you're a Godzilla fan overall and you're not the biggest fan of -1, or if you're a casual figure collector, I do think you can skip this one out. Thank you to whoever sold this to me. I really appreciate it, and I hope I can figure it out soon so that I can shout you out. Also, thank you to my patrons over on Patreon. It is through the support of the patrons on Patreon that I'm able to review figures like this for you in the first place, and to make videos like this. So if you want to support the Patreon, you can use the link in the description below, where you can get early access to content, access to the Discord community, and more. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I will see you all next time for the next one. D-Man out.